I pressed my forehead against the cold marble countertop in Mr. Ciro's industrial estate kitchen, my tears splashing onto the spotless surface I'd spent hours polishing that morning, trying desperately to muffle my sobs with the sound of running water from the farmhouse sink, when I heard those footsteps, Italian leather on Portuguese tile, unmistakable and terrifying, the sound that always made my spine straighten automatically even when he wasn't looking. Standing in the arched doorway, backlit by the golden California sunset, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling Los Angeles hills, was Matteo Ciro himself, 6 feet 4 inches of dark Italian power, wrapped in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than I'd earn in 6 months. The most feared Mafia boss in Los Angeles, his jacket unbuttoned, and his expression shifting from cold authority to something I'd never seen cross his devastatingly handsome face before. Raw, unfiltered concern that made my breath catch even through my tears. For 6 months, I had maintained the perfect facade of the invisible maid, the woman who arrived before dawn and left after dark, who never made eye contact, who never asked questions about the men in expensive suits who smelled of gunpowder and spoke in hushed Italian about territories and shipments, who never commented on the bloodstains I'd scrubbed from these marble floors with my bare hands and industrial cleaner. I had been so careful, so meticulously professional, keeping every surface spotless and every boundary intact, burying my inappropriate awareness of him so deep beneath exhaustion and survival instinct that I sometimes almost convinced myself it didn't exist at all. The way my hands trembled when he passed too close, the way his cologne lingered in rooms long after he'd left, the way his dark eyes sometimes caught mine for half a second before I remembered to look away. But today, the hospital had called. Luca, my baby brother, leukemia, aggressive, stage 3. The words had crashed through my carefully constructed walls, like a wrecking ball through paper. Treatment available. Experimental. Expensive. $850,000. Money I would never have. Not in this lifetime. Not if I worked 3 jobs for the next decade. Not if I sold everything I owned and begged on street corners until my knees bled. And now Matteo Ciro stood before me, watching me fall completely apart in his kitchen, in his territory, in his space. And instead of the dismissal or disgust I expected, he asked in that deep, accented voice that made my spine straighten involuntarily even now, "Chi ti ha fatto piangere, Sophia?" Then, switching to perfect English with dark promise, threading through every word like smoke, "Who made you cry? Tell me their name, and I'll make sure they never make you cry again." The question should have terrified me. This was a man who solved problems with violence and money in equal measure, whose reputation whispered through Los Angeles like a ghost story told to frightened children. But instead, something cracked open inside my chest, something I'd been holding closed for 7 years since our parents died and left me alone with a 10-year-old brother to raise, because for 6 months, I'd been invisible, a ghost who cleaned and vanished. And now, in my weakest moment, someone finally saw me. Not just saw me, wanted to destroy whatever hurt me. I opened my mouth to apologize professionally, to compose myself, to rebuild the walls that kept me safe and employed and separate from his dangerous world. But the words died in my throat when Matteo crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, when he reached out with one large hand and took my chin, with surprising gentleness, tilting my face up, until I had no choice but to meet those dark, intense eyes that had haunted my dreams for months, eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense I'd ever built. "Sei mia da proteggere," he said softly, his thumb brushing away a tear from my cheek. Then he translated, though something in his tone suggested the English couldn't capture everything the Italian meant. "You are mine to protect. Do you understand, Sophia?" And in that moment, in that sun-drenched Los Angeles kitchen, with tears still wet on my face, and the scent of his cologne filling my lungs, and his hand warm against my skin, Sophia Johns's carefully invisible life exploded into dangerous, terrifying visibility. Wait! Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And what time is it for you right now? I love connecting with you all around the world. If you're already hooked on Sophia and Matteo's story, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notification bells so you never miss what happens next. Trust me, things are about to get intense. Now, let's dive into the story. "It's nothing you need to worry about, Mr. Ciro," I managed to whisper. Even though my voice cracked halfway through, and fresh tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and humiliating against my skin. It's personal. It's my problem to handle. And I apologize for breaking down in your kitchen during work hours. It was completely unprofessional, and it won't happen again. His eyes narrowed dangerously, and I watched his expression shift into something darker, something that reminded me exactly why rival gangs avoided his territory, why his name was spoken in Los Angeles' underworld with a mixture of respect and terror that bordered on reverence. Sophia Johns, he said slowly, deliberately, as if he was explaining something to someone who didn't quite understand how his world worked. In the 6 months you've worked for me, you have never once been late, never once left a surface unpolished, never once flinched when men walked through these doors with blood on their hands, never once shown me anything but perfect composure, even when lesser people would have quit after the first week. He released my chin but didn't step back, and the kitchen suddenly felt impossibly small with his broad shoulders and muscular frame taking up all the oxygen. So, when I find you hiding in my kitchen, crying like your world is ending, it becomes my problem whether you want it to be or not, because you are mine to protect. Do you understand? The possessiveness in his tone should have sent warning bells ringing through my head, should have reminded me that this was a dangerous man who owned people and places and entire neighborhoods, who didn't understand boundaries because he'd never needed to respect them. But instead, I felt something inside me break completely, like a dam that had been holding back 7 years of stress and fear and exhaustion finally giving way under impossible pressure. My brother, I choked out, the words tumbling from my lips before I could stop them, before I could remember all the reasons why dragging Matteo Ciro into my messy, complicated disaster of a personal life was the worst possible decision I could make. Luca, he's 17. The hospital called this morning. Leukemia. Aggressive. They said he has 6 months without treatment, maybe a year if we're lucky. But there's an experimental protocol that could save him, that could give him years, maybe decades, maybe a normal life. My voice broke again, and I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly freezing despite the warm California evening. It costs $850,000, and I have $12,000 saved. That's it. 7 years of working myself to exhaustion, and I have $12,000. I watched his expression transform, his features hardening into something absolutely focused. His hand went to his pocket, pulling out his phone with movements that were casual yet purposeful, and I watched from where I stood among the kitchen equipment I'd polished so carefully as he dialed a number with steady fingers. "Dr. Castellano," he said into the phone, his voice shifting into the commanding tone I recognized from when he conducted business. "I'm sending you a patient. Luca Johns, 17 years old, leukemia, aggressive presentation. I want the best treatment available. Money is not an object. I want him to live." He paused, listening. "You have my word, and my gratitude." He ended the call and looked at me, and the intensity in his gaze made my knees weak. "No," I whispered, shaking my head even though hope was flooding through me like poison. "No, Mr. Ciro, I can't accept charity. I'll pay you back somehow. I'll work extra hours, This isn't charity, Sophia," he interrupted, his voice soft but absolute. "This is a transaction. I pay for your brother's treatment. All of it. The experimental protocol, the best doctors, the private facility, whatever he needs for however long he needs it." He stepped closer, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "And in return, you belong to me." My breath caught in my throat. I don't understand. "You move into this estate, permanently. You stop being invisible. You become mine, not my maid, but my woman. You sit at my table, wear clothes I choose, accompany me where I need you. You become visible, Sophia. Publicly, obviously, undeniably mine." His hand came up again, fingers tracing my jawline with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his words. "Do you understand the difference?" I did. Oh God, I did. He wasn't asking me to clean his floors anymore. He was asking me to belong to him in ways that went far beyond employment, to step into his dangerous world not as a servant but as something else entirely, something that terrified me and thrilled me in equal measure. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this?" His smile was dark and honest. "Because I'm not a good man, Sophia. I'm a selfish one. I've wanted you since you first walked into my home 6 months ago with your head down and your hands shaking, trying so hard to be invisible. But you were untouchable, too proud to accept anything you hadn't earned, too careful to let anyone close. This situation with your brother? He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. It gave me the excuse I needed to make you mine. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts over the rush of blood in my ears. This was insane. Impossible. I'd be trading one cage: poverty, invisibility, desperation for another. A golden cage, yes, but still a cage, belonging to a man who solved problems with violence, who lived in a world of blood and bullets and power. But Luca would live. My baby brother would have a chance at a future instead of a coffin. If I accept, I said slowly, my voice steadier than I expected. What exactly are your terms? You move in tonight. Tomorrow, we visit Luca together and tell him his treatment is covered. You stop working as my maid and start living as my woman. You give me your time, your presence, your trust. You let me see you, Sophia. Really see you. No more hiding. No more invisibility. His thumb traced my lower lip, and I shivered. And you give me a chance to make you fall in love with me. And if I don't fall in love with you? His smile was predatory and beautiful. Then I'll keep trying until you do. Because I'm a patient man when I want something, Kara. And I want you. I closed my eyes, thought of Luca's bright smile, of his dreams of college and art, and a future that stretched beyond hospital beds and funeral homes. Thought of 7 years of sacrificing everything to keep him safe, of working myself to exhaustion just to keep us afloat. Thought of Matteo Ciro's dark eyes and dangerous hands and the way he'd looked at me just now like I was precious, like I was worth destroying worlds to protect. For Luca, I whispered, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. I accept your terms, Mr. Ciro. Matteo, he corrected, his hand sliding to cup the back of my neck, possessive and warm. You call me Matteo now, because you're mine, Sophia, and I protect what's mine. Then he kissed me fierce, and claiming and surprisingly tender, and I tasted my own tears, and his hunger, and the promise of a future I'd never imagined. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. Welcome to your new life, amor mio, he murmured. I promise you, you'll never be invisible again. Matteo personally moved me from my cramped studio apartment the next morning, his men carrying my pathetic collection of belongings while he stood in the center of my tiny living space that could fit inside his bedroom closet 3 times over, his expensive suit looking obscene against my thrift store furniture. He touched nothing, just watched me pack with an intensity that made my hands shake. And when I apologized for how little I had, he said softly, "You'll never have little again, Kara." The suite he gave me in the estate's east wing stole my breath, a bedroom larger than my entire apartment, all cream, silk, and dark wood, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the hills. The bathroom was marble and gold, the kind of space I'd only seen in magazines, and when I opened the walk-in closet, I found it filled with designer clothes in my exact size, dresses and shoes and lingerie that must have cost thousands. "You've been paying attention," I whispered, running my fingers over silk and cashmere, and behind me, Matteo's voice was dark with satisfaction. "I pay attention to everything about you, Sophia. Have since the day you arrived." Then came the revelation that made my skin prickle with something between violation and protection. He'd had men watching me for months, knew about my 2 other cleaning jobs, knew debt collectors had harassed me outside the diner, where I worked nights, knew I'd been skipping meals to save money. I had them discouraged, he said casually, as if having people beaten for bothering me was perfectly normal. Permanently. I should have been horrified, but instead I felt something warm unfurl in my chest. Someone had been protecting me when I thought I was completely alone. The medical wing took my breath away for different reasons. Luca's room was already prepared with hospital equipment that looked brand new, monitors and IV stands, and a bed that probably cost more than a car, with private nurses scheduled around the clock. Matteo showed me through it with quiet pride, his hand resting possessively on my lower back, and when I started crying again, he pulled me against his chest and let me soak his expensive shirt with tears. At the hospital, Luca's face, when we walked in together, was priceless shock and confusion, and something like fear when he recognized Matteo Ciro standing beside his sister. But when we told him about the treatment, about the facility, about how he was going to live, my brother broke down completely. Matteo stepped out to give us privacy, and Luca grabbed my hand hard enough to hurt. "What did this cost you, Sophie?" he asked, his voice raw with understanding beyond his years. I looked at my baby brother, the only family I had left, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, and told him the truth. Everything. And nothing. I don't know yet. That evening, Matteo insisted I dine with him, and I sat across from him at the massive table where I'd once served his meals, feeling completely out of place in a designer dress that cost more than my monthly rent. He watched me with dark intensity as I picked at food. I was too nervous to taste, and finally he spoke. You think I'm doing this from kindness? Let me be clear, Sophia. I'm not a kind man, I'm a selfish one. I want you. Have wanted you since you first walked into my home with your head down and your hands shaking. But you were untouchable, invisible by choice. This situation with your brother, it gave me the excuse I needed to make you mine. So I'm what? I asked, my voice sharper than intended. A pet? A possession you acquired? His smile was dangerous and beautiful, and he leaned back in his chair, like a king surveying his kingdom. No, Kara. You're the woman I'm going to make fall in love with me. The difference is you'll choose it. But first, you'll learn what it means to be seen, to be wanted, to be mine. Sleep wouldn't come that night, so I explored the estate's darkened hallways, drawn by a light spilling from Matteo's study. He sat behind his desk, surrounded by documents, and I glimpsed names and numbers and shipment routes before he noticed me in the doorway. The legitimate business facade cracked open, showing the darkness beneath. This was the real empire, built on violence and power, and things that would never see daylight. He caught me looking, and something shifted in his expression. Does it frighten you? He asked softly, knowing what I really am. I stepped into the study, my bare feet silent on expensive carpet, and met his eyes without flinching. I've always known, I whispered. I cleaned blood from your floors, Matteo. I'm not naive. I just didn't think someone like you would ever notice someone like me. His smile was predatory and tender all at once, and he stood slowly, crossing to me with purpose. Then you underestimated both of us, he murmured, his hand coming up to cup my face with that surprising gentleness that made my breath catch. Because I see you, Sophia Johns. And now that you're mine, I'm never looking away. 3 weeks later, I barely recognized myself in the mirror designer gown of midnight blue, professional styling that made my hair fall in dark waves, diamonds at my throat that Matteo had fastened himself with possessive fingers. Luca's treatment was progressing beautifully, his color returning, his strength building as he lived comfortably in the medical wing, and I had transformed from invisible Maid to something else entirely. I carried myself differently now, head up, eyes forward, and when Matteo looked at me across rooms, I didn't look away anymore. The charity gala downtown was my first public appearance as his, and the moment we entered the ballroom, I felt every eye turn toward us. The other Mafia families were there with their wives who looked at me with expressions that combined envy and pity, like they knew exactly what I'd traded for my place beside Matteo Ciro. I handled their subtle digs and calculating questions with grace I didn't know I possessed. And when I caught Matteo watching me with dark pride, something warm bloomed in my chest. Then Lorenzo Santoro appeared mid-30s, handsome in a cold way, dangerous energy, radiating from him like heat. He took my hand and kissed it too long, his eyes calculating as they assessed me. How fortunate for you, Miss Johns, that your brother fell ill precisely when Matteo Ciro was positioned to play savior. Fortuna, see? Or something else. Matteo's hand tightened possessively on my waist, his voice dropping to something lethal. Careful, Lorenzo. You're speaking about what's mine. Lorenzo's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I meant no disrespect. Simply observing that fate works in mysterious ways. Sometimes tragedy and opportunity arrive together, no? In the car afterward, I couldn't stay quiet. What did he mean? Matteo's jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The Santoros have been trying to find leverage against me for years. If they had anything to do with Luca's diagnosis being discovered when it was, you think they engineered this? My voice shook. I think they're opportunists. And I think you've become visible enough to be targeted. Sleep wouldn't come that night. Lorenzo's words circling in my head like vultures. I accessed Luca's patient portal on my laptop, digging through hospital records with growing dread, and found something that made my blood run cold. The routine blood work that discovered Luca's leukemia was ordered by a doctor we'd never seen, at a hospital we'd never visited, paid for by an anonymous charitable foundation. 20 minutes of research traced the foundation's shell company back to Santoro Holdings. They knew. They'd found Luca's illness and made sure I found out, knowing I'd be desperate, knowing Matteo would see an opportunity to claim me. I found Matteo in his study, showed him the documents with shaking hands. His rage was cold and terrible, more frightening than any explosion would have been. "They used your brother as bait," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Used you to get to me. They turned your love for Luca into a weapon. So, what do we do?" He pulled me close, his hands framing my face with surprising gentleness despite the fury in his eyes. "We make sure they regret it. But Sophia, this means war. Real war, and you're in the center of it now. If you want out, if you want to take Luca and disappear, I'll arrange it. I'll protect you from a distance." I looked at this dangerous man who'd claimed me, who'd saved my brother, who'd made me visible when I'd spent years perfecting invisibility. "I'm already in the center," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I became visible, remember? Your words. And I'm not going back to being invisible, not now, not ever. So if they want war, let's give them war." His kiss was claiming and fierce, desperate and proud all at once. "Dio mio," he breathed against my lips. "You're going to destroy me, woman." The countdown began immediately. Matteo moved me to a secure penthouse downtown, all glass and steel with guards positioned at every entrance. And Rico started training me with a clinical efficiency that would have been terrifying if I wasn't already numb with fear. I'd never held a gun before, and the small 380 felt heavy and foreign in my shaking hands. But Rico was patient, correcting my stance, teaching me to breathe through the recoil. Meanwhile, Marcus positioned men throughout the cathedral disguised as parishioners, tourists, even clergy, while Matteo spent hours on the phone negotiating with other family heads, ensuring the neutral witnesses would be sympathetic when everything went wrong. Late that first night, I found Matteo on the penthouse balcony, looking out over Los Angeles where the city lights spread below us like scattered stars. I joined him silently, and for a long moment neither of us spoke, just stood there, with the weight of 48 hours pressing down on our shoulders. "My mother was killed when I was 19, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tortured for 3 days by the Castellano family. They wanted information about my father's operations. She gave them nothing. They killed her anyway, and left her body where he'd find it a message. My hand found his, threading our fingers together. My father never recovered, became ruthless, paranoid, trusted no one, loved nothing. He taught me that caring about anyone was weakness, that love was leverage your enemies would use to destroy you." "Is that why you never married?" I asked softly. "I never even let myself want someone, until you walked into my kitchen 6 months ago, afraid and trying so hard not to show it, and I couldn't stop watching you. Couldn't stop wanting to know what made you smile, what made you cry, what would make you see me as something other than a monster. I saw you as a man the first day I worked for you," I whispered. "A dangerous man, yes, a powerful one, but also lonely. I recognized it because I was lonely too. Have been for 7 years since our parents died, and I became Luca's mother and father and sister all at once. I made myself invisible because being seen meant being vulnerable, and I couldn't afford vulnerability. And now I realize invisibility was its own prison. You broke me out of it. And even if this all ends badly, even if Lorenzo Santoro kills me tomorrow, I won't regret becoming visible. I won't regret letting you see me. I won't regret falling in love with you." He turned to me then, framing my face with both hands, his eyes blazing with something that looked like desperation and devotion all at once. "Sophia Johns, tomorrow you walk into a cathedral that might become your tomb. You'll face men who want to use you as a weapon against me. And I'm going to let you do it because I trust you. Because you're not mine to cage. You're mine to fight beside." His kiss was desperate and claiming and tender, and we made love on that balcony under the LA stars, fierce and sweet and full of promises we might not survive to keep, claiming each other in ways that went beyond words or deals or transactions. Morning came too quickly. I woke to find Matteo already dressed, reviewing final plans with Rico, but when he saw me awake, he dismissed Rico and came to sit beside me on the bed. "Tell me you'll come back to me," he said, and his voice actually shook. "Tell me you'll be there when I do," I countered. "Always. Per sempre. Forever." He gave me the pistol, then small and deadly, easy to conceal. 7 rounds. Safety here. Aim center mass. Don't hesitate. I won't. The drive to the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels was silent, me, Matteo, Rico, and security detail, moving through Los Angeles like ghosts. When we arrived at the massive modern cathedral, with its soaring lines and alabaster walls, I saw the other family's representatives already positioned, saw Lorenzo's men waiting with predatory patience. This was it. The Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels rose before us like a fortress of faith, soaring ceilings, alabaster walls, natural light streaming through, and golden shafts that made everything feel surreal and holy. Representatives from 3 neutral families were already positioned throughout the massive space, witnesses to whatever would unfold here. Lorenzo Santoro stood near the altar with his men, looking relaxed and confident, like a man who'd already won. A neutral party read the terms aloud, his voice echoing through the sacred space. Matteo surrenders operational control of the port of Los Angeles and delivers Sophia in exchange for Luca's safe return. I would walk alone down the center aisle to where Luca was being held in a side chapel. Matteo would remain at the entrance with the port documents. Once I reached Luca, the exchange would be complete, documents handed over. Santoros leave with everything they wanted. These are sacred terms, witnessed by the families, Lorenzo announced, his voice carrying easily. Any betrayal will result in the betrayer being declared outcast, fair game for all. Understood? Matteo's response was ice cold. Understood. And you understand what happens if you harm either of them? Perfectly. I began walking, and every eye in the cathedral followed me. I dressed simply: dark jeans, white shirt, Matteo's leather jacket wrapped around me like armor, symbolically wearing his protection. The small pistol pressed against the small of my back, hidden but present. My heels echoed on marble floor that had witnessed countless prayers, and I didn't look back at Matteo, because if I did, I'd lose my nerve completely. The side chapel appeared ahead, and there was Luca, pale, weak, but alive. The IV was disconnected, his arm bruised purple, but when he saw me, tears streamed down his face. Sophie, I've got you, I whispered, reaching for him. That's when Lorenzo moved. Fast, too fast. His gun was drawn and pressed against my temple before I could process the betrayal. Cold metal, biting into my skin. Did you really think I'd honor this agreement? Lorenzo called out to Matteo, his voice echoing through God's house with blasphemous satisfaction. Did you really think I'd let you keep anything? The ports, the woman, the boy? No, Ciro. Today you lose everything. Your empire, your leverage, your humanity. He gestured, and one of his men raised a weapon aimed directly at Luca's chest. And everyone here will witness that you broke the sacred terms by trying to ambush us. That your men, hidden throughout this cathedral, started the violence. We were defending ourselves. Lorenzo's breath was hot against my ear. It's perfect, really. You die, the boy dies, and Matteo Ciro becomes the monster who brought war to holy ground. Time slowed down. I saw Luca across the chapel, saw the Santoro soldier's finger tightening on the trigger, saw Matteo in my peripheral vision, every muscle coiled, calculating impossible odds, preparing to start a bloodbath he might not survive. I thought about 6 months of invisibility, about making myself small and silent and safe, about Matteo's words on the balcony. You're not mine to cage, you're mine to fight beside. I wasn't invisible anymore, and invisible people couldn't save anyone. I drove my elbow back into Lorenzo's solar plexus, exactly like Rico had taught me, putting my whole body weight behind it. His grip loosened just enough. I dropped my weight, twisted hard, and drew the pistol from the small of my back, in one fluid motion that felt both foreign and natural. I didn't aim at Lorenzo. I aimed at the man pointing a gun at my brother, and fired. The gunshot echoed through the cathedral like the voice of God himself, and the Santoro soldier dropped, clutching his shoulder. Luca scrambled away, and everything exploded into chaos. Lorenzo still had his gun, but I was no longer in his grip. I stood between him and Luca, my weapon pointed at his chest with hands that were surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. You made a mistake, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. You thought I was leverage. I'm not. I'm Matteo Ciro's woman, and I protect what's mine too. Everything happened at once. Matteo's hidden men revealed themselves throughout the cathedral, parishioners pulling weapons from beneath coats, tourists dropping their cameras for guns. The neutral witnesses drew their own weapons but held position, waiting to see who'd actually broken the sacred terms first. Lorenzo's men scattered like roaches when the lights come on, some diving for cover, others running for exits, their loyalty evaporating in the face of real consequences. Matteo moved toward me with lethal speed, but Lorenzo was backing toward an exit, gun still raised, desperation making him dangerous. "You brought armed men into neutral ground, Ciro," he shouted. "You violated sacred terms." Matteo's response was ice cold. "You held a gun to her head and threatened to kill a sick child. In a cathedral, in front of witnesses. You violated every sacred term we have, and now you answer for it." The neutral witnesses conferred quickly, and the head representative, an older man named Sal Moretti, who'd presided over territorial disputes for 40 years, stepped forward. Lorenzo Santoro violated the terms by threatening violence against the exchanged parties before the transaction was complete. Matteo Ciro acted in legitimate defense. The Santoro organization is hereby declared outcast. No protection, no alliance. Open season. Lorenzo's face went white because he understood exactly what that meant, a death sentence wrapped in formal language. He fired wildly at Matteo as he turned to run, and I didn't hesitate. I moved in front of Matteo and fired 3 more rounds at Lorenzo. At least one hit he stumbled, crashed against a pew, and fell hard onto the cathedral marble. His men abandoned him immediately, hands raised in surrender or fleeing through side exits like rats from a sinking ship. Matteo reached me in 2 strides, yanking me against him so hard I gasped. "Are you hit? Sophia, answer me, are you hit?" No, I'm okay." "Luca, where's Luca?" "Rico has him." Matteo breathed against my hair. "Getting him out to medical personnel now. He's safe. You saved him." His hands were shaking as they held my face, and I realized with shock that Matteo Ciro, the most feared man in Los Angeles, was trembling. "You stepped in front of me. You could have died." "So could you. That's what you do for people you love, remember? You protect them." Lorenzo was still alive, bleeding out on marble that had witnessed 1,000 prayers. Matteo approached him slowly, deliberately, and I followed because I needed to see this end. Lorenzo's eyes found mine as his life drained away, and I saw the moment he understood the invisible maid he'd used as bait had become the weapon that destroyed him. "You wanted to know what happens when you touch what's mine?" Matteo said softly. "Now you know." Lorenzo died with my face as his last sight. The neutral family's representatives declared the situation resolved with clinical efficiency. The Santoro organization's remaining leadership would answer for Lorenzo's violation of sacred terms. Their territories were forfeit, carved up among the other families. Matteo's port operations remained his, and me. "She was never actually in play," Matteo told them, his arm wrapped protectively around my waist. "Because she was never mine to bargain with. She's her own woman. She chose me. There's a difference." The witnesses nodded, satisfied. This was the old way, the honorable way, and justice had been served in God's house, after all. Luca was rushed to Cedars-Sinai with Matteo's best doctors attending, and his treatment was back on track within hours. He was weak, shaken, but alive and stable, and I sat beside his bed, holding his hand while still covered in blood, some Lorenzo's, some from the soldier I'd shot. I hadn't changed clothes yet, couldn't seem to make myself care about the stains that marked me as someone who'd crossed a line I could never uncross. When Luca woke fully, he looked at me for a long moment, his eyes older than they'd been just days ago. "You killed someone." "For me, I did. Does it bother you?" I considered the question honestly, searching inside myself for the guilt and trauma I'd expected to find. I thought it would. I thought I'd feel guilty or horrified. But all I feel is relief. That you're alive. That Matteo's alive. That we survived. "You're different than you were 6 months ago," Luca observed, squeezing my hand weakly. "When this all started, you're not invisible anymore." "No, I'm not." "Good," my brother said firmly. And despite everything, there was pride in his voice. Because the invisible Sophie was slowly disappearing for real. This Sophie, the one who shoots people and dates Mafia bosses and wears designer clothes, this Sophie is actually alive. Matteo entered then. And he'd been handling the political aftermath for hours, meeting with family heads, ensuring the Santoro organization's dismantling went smoothly, securing our position in the new power structure. But when he saw me still covered in blood, his carefully controlled expression cracked completely. He dismissed the guards, closed the door, and pulled me into his arms so hard I could barely breathe. "You could have died today. When you stepped in front of me, Cristo, Sophia. I thought my heart stopped. I couldn't let him shoot you. I couldn't let everything we've built together end in that cathedral. You've become everything to me, Matteo confessed against my hair, his voice raw in a way I'd never heard before. My redemption, my weakness, my strength. I built an empire on violence and control, and then you walked into my life and taught me that love is stronger than fear. That being vulnerable isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing a man like me can do. He pulled back, reached into his pocket, and produced a small velvet box that made my breath catch. I was going to wait, do this properly, but today reminded me that we don't always get tomorrow. Sophia Johns, you've seen every part of me, the monster and the man, and you chose to stand beside me anyway. You chose to be visible, even when invisibility would have been safer. Will you marry me? Will you choose me every day for the rest of our lives? The ring was perfect, a single diamond, elegant and simple, not ostentatious or showy, just beautiful in its clarity. On one condition, I said, and his eyes widened slightly. Anything. I'm not marrying Matteo Ciro, Mafia boss. I'm marrying Matteo, the man who makes chamomile tea and watches over my brother, and looks at me like I'm precious. The man, not the monster. Can you be that man? His smile was genuine and vulnerable, all his defenses stripped away. For you, amor mio, I can try to be anything. Then yes, I'll marry you. He slid the ring onto my finger with shaking hands and kissed me like I was air and he'd been drowning. And from the hospital bed, Luca's weak voice interrupted. Does this mean I have to call him brother? Because that's weird. We laughed, all three of us, and it felt like family. Like home. Like everything we'd fought for in that cathedral had been worth the blood and the bullets and the fear. I stood in the master bedroom of the Los Angeles estate, no longer a guest wing, but my home, truly mine, and watched the California sun pour through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning everything golden. I wore one of Matteo's dress shirts, barefoot, my hair loose and wild, my hand resting on my growing belly where our child grew strong and safe at 5 months. In the reflection, I barely recognized myself, not because I'd changed externally, though the confidence in my posture was new, but because of how I carried myself now, head up, eyes clear, visible, present, real. Through the window, I saw Luca, in the garden below, laughing with friends from UCLA. He was in full remission, his hair grown back thick and dark, his face filled with color and life. He'd moved into the guest house, given space to be a college kid, while still close enough for family dinners 3 times a week. He and Matteo had formed an unlikely bond. Luca genuinely interested in the legitimate business operations Matteo was expanding. Matteo patient in teaching him about logistics and management and building something that wouldn't require violence to sustain. On the desk sat documents showing the systematic dismantling of Matteo's criminal empire. The port operations were being legitimized. The money laundering fronts were becoming real businesses. It was slow, dangerous work. Some old associates had objected to this transformation. Those objections had been handled, permanently, quietly, because Matteo was becoming the man I'd always seen beneath the monster. Not perfect, not innocent, but choosing differently because of love. The wedding had been small, held in the estate's garden 6 weeks ago. Just close friends, Luca, Rico, a few trusted people who'd witnessed our journey. I'd worn a simple white dress and carried wildflowers, and Matteo had cried when I walked toward him. We'd written our own vows. Mine. I choose to see you every day, to be visible beside you, to build a life where neither of us has to hide. His. I choose to protect you, not by caging you, but by standing beside you, to love you not as possession, but as partner, to be worthy of your visibility. There hadn't been a dry eye present. I heard his footsteps, still recognized that distinctive sound of Italian leather on tile after all these months. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, and the smile that crossed his face when he saw me was pure joy, unguarded and beautiful. Cosa stai pensando, amore mio? He asked softly. I turned from the window. I'm thinking about the day you found me crying in your kitchen, how I thought my life was ending, how I couldn't see that it was actually beginning. Matteo crossed to me, wrapped his arms around me from behind, his hands covering mine on our growing child. You gave me back my humanity, Sophia. Reminded me that power without love is just noise, that control without trust is just fear. And you gave me permission to exist, I countered. To take up space, to be seen and wanted and valued. You turned my invisibility into visibility, and my fear into strength. What do you want for this child? Matteo asked, his hand moving gently over my belly. What kind of life? I want them to never feel invisible, to never believe they have to hide who they are to survive, to know they're loved not for what they can do for us, but for who they are. Then that's what they'll have, Matteo promised. A life where they're seen, protected, free. From downstairs, we heard Luca calling us for dinner he'd learned to cook, had made pasta badly, but with love. I took Matteo's hand, ready to go be visible. His kiss was tender and possessive and full of promise. With you? Always. We walked downstairs together, hand in hand, and the dining room was filled with golden light and Luca's laughter and the smell of overcooked pasta and fresh bread. This ordinary, beautiful, visible life was what we'd fought for. And as I sat at the table where I'd once served silently, now surrounded by family I'd chosen and love I'd fought for, I understood with perfect clarity. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from hiding in the shadows. Sometimes it comes from stepping into the light, bloody, terrified, absolutely visible, and discovering that being seen is the most powerful thing a woman can do. And sometimes monsters don't need slaying. Sometimes they just need someone brave enough to see the man beneath, and strong enough to love him anyway. Thank you so much for watching Sophia and Matteo's story to the end. If you loved their journey from invisible to unforgettable, please like this video and let me know in the comments. What was your favorite moment in this story? Was it the kitchen scene? The cathedral showdown? The proposal? Tell me everything. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next amazing story. I post content regularly, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.